Well, welcome back from lunch. I hope you had a good break. Hope you got a couple of coffees in, because this afternoon's streams are certainly going to impart a lot of knowledge on you for helping you starting out in private practice. Our next presenter is Ben Weeding from LGen Property. Ben is a former institutional equities trader at highly regarded investment bank JP Morgan. Despite his high-level exposure to the equities market in Asia and around the world, Ben developed a keen interest in the Australian property market. Utilising his analytical skills, he went on to develop a substantial portfolio through his own renovations and developments, and has provided his services successfully to many of Cutcher Neale clients. I personally have invested with Ben in the past, and Ben has been very thorough in his approach and very analytical in the outcomes. And the first thing you always say is, the question is, what does a buyer's agent charge? Well, I can tell you something, it doesn't really matter, because what they bring to the table, it will be far more value than the fee that they charge as they help you acquire a new building or premises or residential property. So I won't hold on much longer. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And what I'll do is I'll ask Ben those questions at the conclusion of his presentation. But right now, I'll pass you over to Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Jared. Appreciate that. I hope everybody can see the screen now. Today, my presentation is targeted within the theme of the day for doctors and allied health professionals that are thinking about going out on their own or planning to do so, or maybe have done so and are looking for a little bit of extra guidance. We're going to focus around a part of the business which is often not thought about when starting or operating a practice, but can be one of the most lucrative attributes to personal wealth of the practitioner, and that is commercial property. Okay. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about why commercial property can play a key role in your practice. We're going to talk about how to value commercial property. We'll run through the do's and don'ts when you're looking for a site for your practice, and that'll run for about 20 minutes or so. And afterwards, we will run through some questions if you have any. I'm a less is more kind of person. Just important to remember, I am not an accountant. I'm not a financial planner, and I'm also not a valuer. So you do need to seek advice from these particular people to let you know if what I'm going to talk to you about today in this presentation is right for you and specific to you. So there's different ways to approach business before you go out and find a site to operate out of. Many have or will look for a suite or a room to rent or lease. And that's okay, I think, for getting established, but always it's good to always have in the back of your mind that it will be worthwhile looking to get to a point where you can buy the premises that you're operating out of. The property itself can provide an extra kicker in your wealth creation journey that is separate from your business or practice. You can keep putting money into your business, but if that business fails, then what's left for you? It's obviously a bit of a different story in the medical field, but the reality is valuing a business that is essentially a personal brand, it can be difficult for the person whose personal brand it is. And that's because it's not a business you can really on-sell to someone else, because you are the value of that business. So you need to have an outlet for your expected higher revenue streams that allow you to accumulate personal wealth. And your business premises can be a way to take advantage of this. So today, I'd like to help you understand some ways that you can do this. But before we do anything else, we need to understand how to value commercial property. So commercial property at its heart is very similar to residential property in how it gets valued. It gets valued on the unimproved value of the land, so the land itself, then any improvements made to the property, so that's buildings and whatnot, and then general supply and demand in the marketplace. In Australia, for residential property, the conform metric is comparable sales, and that's when one property, the value of one property is compared to similar properties nearby. But commercial property adds an extra metric, and that's the net operating income that that asset produces. That is, how much revenue does a particular commercial property return, and more importantly, for how long? So you hear in some circles that residential property is all about the property, but in commercial property, it's actually all about the contract. So in commercial property investment, what's more important than the property itself is the agreement between the tenant and the landlord, because that's what ends up giving value to the property. So in essence, it's the cash flows that that property creates or can potentially create that give the property its value. So to value these cash flows, we need three things. We need the net operating income, which is the rent minus the outgoings. We need to know the tenure of the lease, or how long the lease goes for. And then we also need to know the discount rate or the interest rate, or sometimes called the capitalization rate that the market values the property at. Now, if you've ever done a business course, you'll think that you'll have seen this formula before. It's called the net present value formula. And that's how we value cash flows for any business and even for commercial property. Now, I'm not going to sit here this afternoon and bore you on the mechanics of the net present value formula. Thank goodness, I hear you say. But what I'm going to do is important to understand, because what I'm going to do is run through some case studies of some practical applications of how commercial property gets valued in the market, and then potentially how you can apply that going forward with your practice. So let's take a look at this particular commercial property. This is units 9, 10, and 11 of a retail outlet. It's about 330 square meters in total. And that property is being tenanted by a pharmacy. Now, this pharmacy is actually in a touristy area. You can sort of see from the surfboards up there on the roof. And not only do they sell medicines, but they sell hats, they sell water, they sell sunscreen, a little bit of extra to get the income coming through, the revenue coming through for the business, but is a high performing asset. Now, the net operating income that the tenant of this property pays to the landlord is $380,000 in this first year of operation. Now, the other good thing about this lease is that that income stream actually rises 4% every year. It's guaranteed and set in the lease. And not only that, but the tenant pays all the outgoings for this property for the landlord. That includes strata levies, land tax, electricity bills, which is another advantage of commercial property, where you can get a lease where the tenant does pay a lot of the outgoings for you. The other good thing about this lease is it's a 20-year lease, a very long-term lease. And this business has been operating for a long time before that as well. So one of the best leases I've probably seen in my time. And the market ended up paying around $6.3 million for this property. I'll put property in inverted commas because, of course, we're not necessarily paying $6.3 million for the property, as we've discussed. We're paying that money for the income stream that that property is producing. So that values that type of asset in the marketplace at around about a 6% yield. So $380,000 income stream on $6.3 million purchase price is around about 6%. So the yield we sometimes call the cap rate, or what's the cap rate that was purchased at, as a terminology in the industry. Now let's fast forward 4 years for this asset, and we've still got 16 years left on the lease. So a very long time. But over that 4 years, that $380,000 income stream has risen to $444,000. And that's based on that 4% compounding rental increase that's within the lease. Now, at this particular time in year 4, in this example, the market still values this type of asset at 6%, at a cap rate of 6%. So if we were to capitalize that $444,000 in income at that 6% cap rate, then the value of the lease then becomes $7.4 million. It's what should be what the market pays for it at that time. So you can see by holding an asset like this with a great lease in place and the rising income stream, how that can add capital growth to your commercial property merely because we're getting those guaranteed rental increases as well. So it's around about a 12 to 13% annualized return for an asset like this over the 4-year period. So we call that an internal rate of return. So you're getting strong cash flow, good capital growth, and less tenancy issues with commercial property. So in the next case study, I'm going to give you a little bit more of a possible practical application that might be more applicable to people listening here today. If you're out looking to buy a property to potentially operate out of, there are several ways to structure this. And those type of structures are beyond the scope of this talk, and they are specific to every person. But as an example only, one great way is to set up a unit trust or an SMSF, self-managed super fund, to hold the asset or the property, and then you have your business or your practice rent that property off your trust. So there are rules around doing this, of course, and your Cutcher Neale expert is the best person to speak to about this. But this case study looks at that as a potential example of what can happen. So in this case study, we've got a dentist who's looking to set up a dental surgery. And in the area that they're looking, the market rate for rental in this area for their particular type of property is $300 a metre. But if they wanted to buy a property, a similar property, it might cost them $6,000 a metre. So the $300 a metre on the $6,000 a metre purchase price, it's around about a 5% yield is what the market pays for this type of asset in the market. Now, this dentist thinks that they need 150 square metres of space to operate their business out of. If they're going to rent that space, it's probably going to cost them in this market around $45,000 a year in rent. And if they're going to buy the space, then they're looking at about $900,000 to buy it. Okay. Now, this dentist has gone out, they've looked around and they've actually found a space that suits their needs, but it's not quite up to scratch. It's like a little bit run down, it needs a bit of a refurb. And they've managed to secure this particular suite at $5,500 a square metre. So a little bit under market price, and they've paid $825,000 for this property. So the dentist now decides, well, I'm going to make this a very salubrious looking internal space. I'm going to make it attractive for people to come in and be patients. I'm going to make it a great place to work. And I'm going to go out, I'm going to spend $150,000 to fit out this property to make it look schmicko. So now total spend has risen from $825,000 to $975,000 on this property because of the fit out. The dentist goes out now and he gets his leasing consultant. Leasing consultant sees it. He says, this is fantastic, this place. This is amazing. In fact, I think this is so good. This fit out so good. I think I could rent this out for potentially $400 per square metre, above the market rate of $300 per square metre. So that would then bring in about $60,000 a year in income. Now, if we capitalise that $60,000 a year in income on the 5% yield, which the market would pay, then all of a sudden the value of any lease that gets put in place with this property increases the property value to around about $1.2 million. So a great situation. I know what you're thinking. Oh my God, how good is this? And if you are thinking that, then great. But as I've said to you before, make sure that it is the right situation for you, and do speak to your expert at Cutcher and Neale before you go and do anything. So we've decided we're going to be out looking for a site to purchase. We've worked out that that's a better option for us. And there are some key things we need to look out for when we're trying to buy the right property. Yes, there's things like proximity to hospitals and other allied health professionals. There's things like aspect, the size of the property, but there are some other important key things to think about. The first is, as we've just explained, not to forget that a commercial property's floor plan is less important than potentially a residential property. If a fit out of a particular property doesn't suit you, don't let that distract you from the property. In most cases, you may want to refresh the fit out at the very least, and you're probably going to spend money on that fit out. Yes, we definitely don't want to spend money that we don't need to, but it is important to remember that a commercial property is a shell, and the cost of a commercial fit out can be a lot less than a residential renovation in a lot of circumstances. So the next thing to do is make sure you ensure you check how long the tenancy has left before you buy it. The most ideal situation when you purchase will be to buy a property actually with a tenant in place. And the reason for this is when you purchase a commercial property with a tenant in the property, then it is considered what's called an ongoing concern, and it doesn't attract GST. However, because you want to move into the property and obviously operate your practice out of it, you want the tenant to be leaving soon after. So the lease in place should be coming to an end soon after purchase, or be a periodical tenancy, which is like a month-to-month tenancy. And that's when the tenant can be removed more easily. That's the ideal situation. But if the site in question is vacant possession, don't let that deter you necessarily from purchasing that type of property. Of course, in some cases, the GST on purchase of a vacant property can be claimed back. You just need to check with your solicitor and accountant before you purchase what the short-term cash flow implications are when you do purchase. The next thing to ensure is that you check the zoning of the site to ensure you can operate your business. If the property isn't already approved to operate your type of business in that premises, you may need to make a development application to council for your fit out and to operate your business out of that premises. This can be easily checked though within the contract via the planning certificate at the back of the contract. You certainly don't want to be buying a property where the type of business you are looking for is prohibited to operate in. Next thing is not to forget to conduct all your due diligence before you purchase. Some of the most important things to review, of course, include finance approval, a review of the contract and the lease of the property, fit out costs are going to be important, strata reports for strata units, and I would even get a building inspection, not only just for standalone properties, but would be recommended for strata units as well. And lastly, do consider your options. Strata offices may seem typical. They're good, less expensive options. However, if the area you're looking in doesn't have a lot of stock available for you to purchase, then potentially looking for a house, which could be converted to an office with the zoning, could be a good option. So that is when a property is a residential house, but it sits on commercial zoning, or even the residential house or the residential zoning allows for your type of business to operate in that zone. The dynamic of the capital growth of the property can change with that too, because it has attributes of a residential marketplace. So it's time to go get your team in place. You need these people if this is the route that you're going to take. The first step is to get your Cutcher Neale expert involved, your accountant and your finance broker, to make sure that you can do this type of thing and that you do have the money to do it. Getting in touch with a commercial architect or a fit out company just to understand the costs of what you're about to entail may also be a crucial element. Definitely be getting a commercial property lawyer so that they can review contracts and leases before you actually purchase. And I would definitely, of course, look at getting an expert in their field to help you look for something. Time is of the essence, and a buyer's agent and a leasing agent can assist in this regard. So these are just some of the things to take into account. If you are considering this option, it's important not to forget the power of this strategy to your own wealth creation story. If you have a couple of people who are looking to do the same thing and potentially work in the same area, remember that a syndicated type of investment or purchase is also possible and may allow you even greater options with your selection of sites. So thank you for listening. These are my details on the screen, which you're welcome to take a photo of. We do look at residential property as well, of course, if that's something that's up your alley. But I've opened the floor for questions and I will do my very best to answer them. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Very, very insightful. Actually, I like the pharmacy example, and I never really thought about the ratchet of 4% in the lease and what it really meant to the property value. More thinking about the first year's return rather than year 4, 5, and 6, I guess.
Yeah, it's a crucial, looking forward is a crucial element to doing the calculations. And I spoke about NPV formulas before, and I actually have a spreadsheet which does all this calculation and works out the actual optimal time to sell, because it's a bit economies of scale. After a period of time, your internal rates of return or your annual returns can diminish. So doing the calculations right is an important thing.
Is that because the lease is starting to run out? Is that where you start to worry
It
about
has,
that?
yeah, it does have that is part of it, yes. And it depends what type of, can depend on what type of, a lot of leases don't end up running the full term with those ratchets as well. So you do have to make, they get revalued at market reviews, then you have to renegotiate at a certain time. So it just depends on the structure of the lease.
Yeah. So just a question for you. Are different types of commercial property valued differently? Like you gave us a pharmacy example there. Like, is it different if it's office space or a commercial shed style?
Yeah, so it's funny when people think commercial property, they tend to just think office space, where it's so far from the truth. There's at the moment, obviously in the market with COVID about and people haven't been working at offices, that type of investment has been not attractive for people, for investors. Industrial units have been very attractive. Fast food has been very attractive. And so this is where a lot of the money's been going to. And then because of that, the way the market values those type of assets increase. So it's important to, market timing can be important, but let's just say in the medical field, they're always highly valued. It doesn't matter at what time. They're a little bit more influenced by interest rates, general interest rates, than whether or not the markets likes medical or not. It always likes medical.
So if I'm a doctor looking to go into practice and like the concept of buying rooms or buying a house, like how do you suggest I start?
So I guess the formula just on that last slide, that would be the way to go about it. I would definitely be speaking to your accountant or financial planner first, if that's the right path for you. If that's fine, then, and you can go ahead, then you've really got to get the next 3 people on board to have a chat to discuss what the next sort of steps are and where you want to be, because they'll be able to filter things down for you and they'll be ready for you when you're ready to go. You know, someone like I think probably the first step would be a buyer's agent, to be honest, just to get the help you point them in the right direction. If you don't have contacts for commercial architects and property lawyers, then they will definitely have those people. But there's no strict order, but you definitely need those 3-4 types of people on board to get the ball rolling, I think.
And is that so that you can start to work out how many square meters I need, how many consult rooms, what about car parking? Like, is that all part of the mix when you're working with someone?
Yeah, it's definitely, it definitely is. You know, I guess if you're buying a house, then the zoning will dictate that. A lot of strata suites will end up having, you know, things like car parking and facilities and that sort of thing as well. So that's generally okay. There can be some kind of issues when it comes to houses, to make sure you have the right type of fit out for and the right type of land and the right type of house for that matter. because individual councils can dictate what you need to have in a particular area to suit the business that you're operating out of. Probably less important for, a dentist or a doctor or something like that. But certainly childcare is a great example where you actually need to have, one car parking space per, 4 kids that are in the complex. So in some council zones. So it's definitely to get a better understanding up front of what you need before you buy anything. That's definitely why you need to contact those people.
Yeah, I guess one of the challenges I've seen even in more recent times in the Newcastle market is number of consult rooms to number of car parks, and it can almost preclude some properties. Yes.
Yep. It can happen. There's no doubt about it. You need to run through all the bits and pieces of it can be other tenancies within the complex as well that that can take up that extra space and that space that you might need. So yeah, definitely.
So just one last question for you. We've got about 4 minutes to go.
Sure.
How important is location? I know we hear location, 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 but what does it really mean when we're stepping out of residential and we're now looking, the average practice might be 300 square meters with 5 consult rooms and a treatment room. So how does that apply now?
Yeah, it's funny. I'd say even it's nearly the opposite for commercial and residential for location. Main roads are actually great for commercial, but not so great for residential. Like high visibility is going to be a powerful attribute with whatever property you purchase. A lot of, I guess, from a medical perspective, location's important when potentially need to be close to other types of professionals or very close to a hospital, or I think maybe Jared, we've spoken about the pharmacy situation before, and you've mentioned that you need to have at least 5 doctors nearby pharmacy for things to operate well out of. So those sort of things which are conducive for business to operate are very important. But I guess the crux of it is it can be a reverse sometimes on if you're comparing it to the residential market.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation, Ben. I always find listening to you, I learn something new every time, and reflecting on that pharmacy really drew out some pretty important points about what the investment really is and how that investment runs with ratchets in leases. I guess the key part for us and for our audience is thinking about buying their rooms. It's one of those ancillary investments that can actually make just as much money in the long term.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time. Thanks, everyone.